The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty highway as Special Agent Dominic Reynolds guided his unmarked sedan through the outskirts of Riverdale. The small town wasn't on any tourist maps, just another dot on the landscape that most people passed through without a second glance. For Dominic, however, it was the focus of a 6-month undercover operation, investigating a series of civil rights violations that had gone unreported for too long. He checked his watch, almost 5:30. The meeting with his informant wasn't until 7 now, giving him plenty of time to drive through town and get a feel for the place. Dominic had been with the Bureau for 12 years, and experience had taught him that understanding the rhythm of a community often revealed more than any official report. The radio played softly in the background as he maintained a steady speed, exactly 3 miles under the limit. Years of fieldwork had ingrained certain habits. Never give anyone an excuse to stop you when you're undercover. His car was deliberately unremarkable, a 5-year-old gray sedan with local plates, nothing that would draw attention. Dominic noticed the police cruiser the moment it pulled out behind him. Nothing unusual about that. Small-town cops often followed out-of-town plates for a block or two. He continued driving, hands at 10 and 2, eyes forward with occasional checks of his mirror. The cruiser stayed behind him for nearly a mile before the flashing lights came on. "What the?" Dominic muttered, checking his speedometer. He hadn't been speeding. His taillights were working and his registration was current. There was no reason for a stop. Following procedure, he signaled and pulled to the shoulder, placing his hands where they would be visible on the steering wheel. Through his rearview mirror, he watched 2 officers exit their vehicle. The taller one approached with his hand resting on his holster, while the second officer circled around to the passenger side. "License and registration," the officer demanded before he had even reached the window. "No introduction, no explanation for the stop." "Officer, may I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Dominic asked calmly, maintaining eye contact. The officer's expression hardened. "I said license and registration now." Dominic nodded slowly. "I'll need to reach for my wallet." "It's in my back pocket." The officer didn't acknowledge this, just stared at him with thinly veiled hostility. Dominic moved deliberately, retrieving his wallet and the car's registration from the glove compartment. He handed them over, careful not to make any sudden movements. The officer glanced at the license. "You're a long way from home, Mr. Reynolds." "Just passing through," Dominic replied evenly. "Heading to see family." The second officer was shining his flashlight into the back seat, peering in through the windows despite the daylight making this unnecessary. "Step out of the car, please," the first officer ordered. "Officer, I haven't violated any traffic laws. May I ask what this is about?" "We've had reports of drug trafficking along this highway." "Step out of the vehicle now." Dominic recognized the tactic immediately. There had been no such reports. It was a pretextual stop, a fishing expedition. He could challenge it, identify himself as FBI, but that would compromise months of careful work. His undercover status meant staying in character, at least for now. "All right, I'm opening my doors slowly." He narrated his actions, knowing that in situations like these, clarity could prevent tragedy. The evening air was cool against his face as he stepped out, standing straight but non-threatening. The officer motioned for him to move toward the back of the vehicle. "Hands on the trunk," the officer instructed, his tone making it clear he was used to being obeyed without question. Dominic complied, watching as the second officer began searching his car without consent, without a warrant, without probable cause. The first officer patted him down roughly. "What brings you to Riverdale, really?" the officer asked, his tone suggesting he already believed whatever answer Dominic gave would be a lie. "Like I said, visiting family." "Funny, don't recall any Reynolds family around here. My cousin married a local. Thompson is the name now." The officer snorted. "Thompson, huh? Got a first name for this cousin?" Dominic had prepared for this. Every undercover operation came with a complete backstory, connections that could be verified if needed. Rob Thompson, works over at the lumber mill." A flash of uncertainty crossed the officer's face, but it quickly hardened again. "Stand right there, don't move." The officer walked back to the cruiser, presumably to run Dominic's license. The second officer emerged from the car, shaking his head slightly at his partner. Nothing found. Dominic could feel the familiar tension building in his shoulders. In 12 years with the Bureau, he'd been in this position more times than he cared to count. Different towns, different officers, same scenario, Never for speeding, never for a broken taillight, never for anything he'd actually done. Just for being who he was, driving where he was driving. The first officer returned, his expression now openly hostile. Your story doesn't check out. There's no Robert Thompson working at the lumber mill. Dominic kept his expression neutral even as his mind raced. That was impossible. The Bureau had established that cover thoroughly. Unless the officer hadn't actually checked. Officer, I assure you. Save it. The officer cut him off. We know what you're doing here. And what exactly am I doing here, officer? Playing dumb isn't going to help you. We've seen your type before coming through thinking you can set up shop in our town. The second officer chimed in. Car's clean, Pete. Officer Pete seemed disappointed by this news. Well, Mr. Reynolds, seems like today's your lucky day. But let me give you some friendly advice. Riverdale isn't welcoming to outsiders bringing trouble. Best you move along. Dominic knew he should just take the warning and go, continue his mission without incident. But something in him couldn't let this stand. Not when this exact behavior was what he was here to investigate. Officer, I'd like your badge number and the specific reason for this stop noted for my records. The atmosphere changed instantly. Officer Pete stepped closer, invading Dominic's personal space. You threatening me? Not at all. I'm exercising my rights as a citizen. The second officer moved in now too. You want to push this? Because we can take this downtown, run a full check, maybe find something in your trunk that you didn't know was there. The threat was clear and illegal. Dominic weighed his options. Revealing himself as FBI now would blow his cover, potentially compromising not just his investigation but putting informants at risk. But letting these officers continue this behavior unchecked went against everything he stood for. I don't consent to any further search of my vehicle, Dominic stated firmly. Officer Pete's face reddened. That's it. Hands behind your back. On what charge? Interfering with a police investigation. Possible suspicion of drug possession. That's ridiculous and you know it. Hands behind your back, or we'll add resisting arrest. As Officer Pete reached for his handcuffs, Dominic knew he'd reached a crossroads. The sun was setting over Riverdale, casting long shadows across the empty highway. And in those lengthening shadows, a decision would have to be made that would change the course of his investigation entirely. He could see it in their eyes. They expected him to run or fight, giving them the excuse they were looking for. Instead, he remained perfectly still, his gaze unwavering. There was a power in that stillness that seemed to unnerve them both. Last chance, Officer Pete warned, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. Dominic took a slow, deep breath. What happened in the next few moments would set in motion events that would ripple through this town for years to come. The truth he carried with him was about to change everything, not just for him, but for these officers and for Riverdale itself. Before you do that, Dominic said quietly, there's something you should know. Before you do that, Dominic said quietly, there's something you should know. Officer Pete snorted, the handcuffs jingling in his grip. Let me guess. Your uncle's a lawyer? Your cousin knows the mayor? The second officer chuckled, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. Something about Dominic's calm demeanor was clearly throwing him off. No, Dominic replied evenly, but if you put those cuffs on me, you'll be creating a situation that neither of us wants. Pete stepped closer, his face inches from Dominic's. Are you threatening an officer of the law? I'm giving you a professional courtesy. Professional? What? You deliver packages for a living and think that makes you professional? The sun had nearly set now, the highway empty except for their vehicles. A perfect place for abuse of power to go unnoticed, except for one crucial detail. Officer, you never asked me what I do for a living, Dominic pointed out. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. Pete, maybe we should— Shut up, Ramirez, Pete snapped. This guy thinks he's something special. Dominic remained perfectly still, maintaining eye contact with Pete. I'm giving you one chance to step back and approach this situation correctly. Ask me why you pulled me over. Check my registration properly. Conduct yourself as an officer should. Pete's face flushed with anger. That's it. I don't know who you think you are, but my name is Special Agent Dominic Reynolds, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Dominic stated firmly, his voice carrying the weight of authority he'd kept hidden until now. And everything that's happened in the last 15 minutes has been recorded. The effect was immediate. Pete froze, handcuffs still open in his hand. Officer Ramirez took an involuntary step backward. "You're lying," Pete said, but the conviction had drained from his voice. "My credentials are in my inside jacket pocket. I'm going to reach for them slowly." Pete didn't respond, seemingly paralyzed by the sudden turn of events. Dominic carefully reached into his jacket and produced a leather wallet. He flipped it open to reveal his FBI badge and identification. "This is," Pete began, then stopped as he examined the credentials more closely. "Legitimate," Dominic finished for him. "Now I'd appreciate it if you'd step back and explain to me why you pulled me over in the first place." Pete handed back the credentials and took a step back. His entire demeanor transformed. "There was a report of a vehicle matching your description involved in a possible drug trafficking operation. Was there?" Dominic asked. "Because your dispatcher would have a record of that call, and I'll be requesting that record." Ramirez looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Pete, we should call the captain." "No," Pete said quickly. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Agent Reynolds was just passing through and we can all go our separate ways." Dominic smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's not how this works, Officer Pete. You see, I'm not just passing through. I'm here on official business." "What kind of business?" Pete asked, a new wariness in his voice. "The kind that involves law enforcement practices in small towns like Riverdale." The color drained from Pete's face as understanding dawned. "You're here to investigate the department." "I didn't say that," Dominic replied carefully. "But it's interesting that's where your mind went immediately." Ramirez looked between the two men, confusion and fear evident on his young face. He couldn't have been more than 2 years out of the academy. "Sir, I didn't know." "Didn't know what, Officer Ramirez?" Dominic asked, turning his attention to the younger officer. "Didn't know that pulling someone over without cause is a violation of their Fourth Amendment rights? Or didn't know that threatening to plant evidence is a federal offense?" Ramirez swallowed hard. "I've only been with the department for 18 months. Officer Walters, he's my training officer." "Some training," Dominic remarked. He returned his attention to Pete. "Officer Walters, I assume?" "Not listed on your nameplate, I notice." Pete's jaw tightened. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," Dominic said. "Right now I have evidence of racial profiling, illegal search and seizure, and threatening to falsify evidence. That's enough to open a formal investigation into not just you, but the entire Riverdale Police Department." "You can't prove any of that," Pete said. A desperate edge to his voice, Dominic gestured to his car. "Body camera activated the moment your lights came on. Standard bureau protocol for undercover operations. Plus the dash cam in my vehicle." Ramirez looked like he might be sick. "Sir, I have a family. I just followed my training officer's lead." "Following orders isn't a defense, Officer Ramirez, but cooperation and honesty go a long way." The highway was dark now, their faces illuminated only by the patrol car's headlights and the dim glow of the dashboard. In that half-light, Dominic could see the calculation happening behind Pete's eyes, weighing options, looking for a way out. "What do you want?" Pete finally asked. "Right now? I want to know if this is standard procedure for the Riverdale PD, or if this was something special you cooked up just for me." Pete and Ramirez exchanged glances. "It's how things are done here," Ramirez admitted quietly. "Captain calls it proactive policing, says it keeps the wrong element out of town." "And who decides who the wrong element is?" Dominic asked, though he already knew the answer. Neither officer responded. "Here's what's going to happen," Dominic continued. "You're going to call this in properly. Report that you stopped an FBI agent conducting official business. Then we're all going to take a trip down to your station to have a chat with your captain." "He won't be there this time of night," Pete said quickly. "Then we'll wake him up," Dominic replied. "This isn't a conversation that can wait until morning." Pete looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. "Fine." As Pete walked back to the patrol car to call in the situation, Ramirez lingered. "Agent Reynolds," he said hesitantly. "I never wanted to be this kind of cop." Dominic studied the young officer's face, looking for sincerity. "Then why are you?" "My first week on patrol, I wrote up a report on Officer Walters for excessive force. Captain tore it up in front of me, told me I'd never make it past probation if I didn't learn how things worked in Riverdale." "And you just accepted that?" Ramirez looked down. "My wife was pregnant with our second child. I couldn't lose this job." He paused, then looked up again. "But I've been keeping records. times, dates, names. I was going to send it to the state police anonymously once I had enough saved for us to move. Dominic considered this. It could be a ploy to gain sympathy, but the fear in Ramirez's eyes seemed genuine. "We'll discuss that at the station," Dominic said finally. "If what you're saying is true, your information could be valuable." Pete returned, his expression unreadable. "Captain says to bring you in. He wants to speak with you personally." "I bet he does," Dominic replied. "I'll follow you there." "No need," Pete said, his tone oddly formal now. "Ramirez will drive your vehicle. Department policy when bringing in someone of interest." Dominic almost laughed at the transparent attempt to get him into the back of a police cruiser. "That won't be happening, Officer Walters. I'll drive myself and you'll lead the way. Unless you'd prefer I call my supervisor and request backup." Pete's jaw tightened again, but he nodded stiffly. "Have it your way." As they prepared to leave, Dominic caught Ramirez's eye. There was something there, hope perhaps, or relief. Whatever corruption had taken root in Riverdale, it was clear not everyone had succumbed willingly. The cruiser pulled away, lights flashing but sirens silent. Dominic followed, maintaining a careful distance. He reached for his phone and pressed a single button. "Control, this is Reynolds," he said when the secure line connected. "Package has been opened ahead of schedule. Local assets compromised. Request surveillance team at Riverdale Police Department ASAP." "Copy that, Reynolds," came the response. "Team is 15 minutes out. Proceed with caution." As Dominic followed the patrol car toward town, he knew the next few hours would determine whether Riverdale could be saved or if the corruption ran too deep. What had started as a routine undercover operation was about to break wide open, and Officer Pete Walters had just unwittingly handed him the key. The police station loomed ahead, a squat brick building with American and state flags hanging limp in the still night air. Whatever waited inside, Dominic was ready. The real work was about to begin. The Riverdale police station stood as a testament to the town's better days. Brick facade weathered by decades of harsh winters, interior lighting that cast everything in a sickly yellow glow. Dominic parked his sedan next to the patrol car and observed Officers Walters and Ramirez waiting by the entrance. Their body language told different stories. Walters rigid with barely contained anger, Ramirez shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Captain's waiting in his office," Walters announced as Dominic approached. "Lead the way," Dominic replied, noting the security cameras positioned above the entrance. He wondered if they actually recorded footage or merely served as deterrence. Either way, the Bureau's technical team would find out soon enough. The station was quiet at this hour, just a dispatcher at the front desk who eyed Dominic with undisguised curiosity, and a lone officer processing paperwork in the bullpen. Small department, small town. All the more reason corruption could flourish unchecked. Walters knocked on a door marked Captain Gregory Thomas before opening it without waiting for a response. Inside, a heavy-set man with steel gray hair and a matching mustache sat behind a desk, cluttered with folders and coffee cups. He didn't stand when they entered. "So," Captain Thomas said, folding his hands over his ample stomach, "you're the FBI agent my officers accidentally hassled." The captain's casual tone contrasted sharply with his piercing gaze. This was a man accustomed to sizing up threats quickly. "There was nothing accidental about it, Captain," Dominic replied, remaining standing despite the empty chair in front of the desk. Officers Walters and Ramirez conducted an illegal traffic stop, search, and attempted arrest. Thomas waved a dismissive hand. "Misunderstanding, that's all. My boys are just doing their job, keeping Riverdale safe." "Safe from who exactly?" The captain's eyes narrowed slightly. "Troublemakers. Drug runners. Outside elements." Interesting choice of words. Thomas leaned forward. "Why don't we cut the dance, Agent Reynolds? What are you really doing in my town?" Dominic studied the office walls, noting the photographs of Thomas with various local dignitaries and politicians. Small-town power cultivated over decades. "I'm investigating multiple reports of civil rights violations by law enforcement in this county," he finally said, watching Thomas's reaction carefully. The captain's expression didn't change, but a vein in his temple began to pulse visibly. "That right? And who's making these so-called reports?" "You know I can't reveal that," Thomas snorted. "Because they don't exist. This is a fishing expedition." Dominic smiled thinly. "The Bureau doesn't waste resources on fishing expeditions, Captain. We have substantial evidence suggesting a pattern of discriminatory policing, excessive force, and falsified reports." "Bullshit," Thomas spat. his composure cracking slightly. "We run a clean department here. Ask anyone." "That's precisely what we're doing," Dominic replied. "In fact, my team has been interviewing residents for weeks." This was a calculated exaggeration. The investigation was still in its early stages, but the effect on Thomas was immediate. His face flushed red. "Without notifying local law enforcement? That's against protocol. Not when local law enforcement is the subject of the investigation." The captain stood abruptly, his chair rolling back to hit the wall. "I've been running this department for 17 years. We maintain order in this town. You have no idea." "I have a pretty good idea," Dominic cut in. "I have dashcam footage of tonight's incident. Officer Walters made his prejudices quite clear, and Officer Ramirez has apparently been documenting similar incidents for months." Ramirez, still standing by the door, paled visibly. Walters spun toward him, fury etched across his face. "You little rat," Walters growled. "That's enough, Pete," Thomas snapped before turning to Ramirez. "Is that true, officer? You've been keeping records behind my back?" Ramirez looked like a cornered animal, eyes darting between his captain, his partner, and the FBI agent who'd just exposed him. He began, then straightened his shoulders slightly. "Yes, sir. I have." The room went deadly quiet. "Why?" Thomas asked, his voice dangerously soft. Ramirez swallowed hard. "Because what we've been doing isn't right, sir. The quotas for stops in certain neighborhoods, the different standards for different people. It's not what I signed up for." "You signed up to follow orders," Walters hissed. "I signed up to protect and serve," Ramirez countered, finding his courage. "All the people of Riverdale, not just the ones who look like us." Dominic watched this exchange with interest. Ramirez might be more valuable than he'd initially thought. Thomas sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 60-plus years. "You have no idea the pressure we're under," he said, addressing Dominic but looking at his desk. "Town council demands results. Crime statistics down, property values up. We deliver. By targeting innocent people based on appearance? By being proactive," Thomas insisted, pounding a fist on his desk. "We know who the troublemakers are." "You mean you decide who they are?" Dominic corrected. "That's the problem." A knock at the door interrupted them. The dispatcher poked her head in. "Sir, there are federal agents at the front desk." "A lot of them." Thomas's face went from red to white. "What did you do?" he asked Dominic. "Standard protocol when an agent's cover is compromised. You didn't think I was working alone, did you?" The captain's shoulders slumped in defeat. Walters looked like he might be sick. "What happens now?" Thomas asked quietly. "Now," Dominic said, "we do this by the book. My team will secure all department records. Officer Ramirez will provide his documentation. Every officer in this department will be interviewed. If the evidence supports it, charges will be filed." "You'll destroy this department," Thomas said, a pleading note in his voice. "This town needs us. This town needs law enforcement it can trust," Dominic corrected. "If that means rebuilding from the ground up, so be it." The door opened again and a woman in a dark suit stepped in. Her badge identified her as Special Agent Chen. "Building secured," she reported to Dominic. "Technical team is setting up in the conference room." "Perfect timing," Dominic replied. Captain Thomas was just about to provide us with full access to all department records and personnel files. Thomas gave a defeated nod. "Whatever you need, Pete," he added, turning to Walters. "Surrender your badge and gun to Agent Chen. You're suspended pending investigation." Walters looked like he might protest, but something in his captain's expression stopped him. Wordlessly, he removed his badge and sidearm, placing them on the desk. "Ramirez," Thomas continued, "you'll assist these agents in any way they require. Consider that your only chance of salvaging your career." Ramirez straightened. "Yes, sir." As Agent Chen led Walters out, Dominic stayed behind with Thomas and Ramirez. "This could have gone very differently," Dominic said. "Your officers could have killed someone during one of these stops." "Maybe they already have." Thomas wouldn't meet his gaze. "We were just trying to keep the peace." "Peace for some isn't peace at all," Dominic replied. "It's oppression." The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. The FBI team worked methodically, copying computer files, cataloging paper records, securing body camera footage. Dominic interviewed officers as they arrived for their shifts, gauging their reactions and separating potential witnesses from hardened participants. By dawn, a clearer picture had emerged. The Riverdale Police Department had operated for years under unofficial quotas and unwritten rules. Officers were rewarded for arrests and citations in certain neighborhoods, disciplined if they didn't meet expectations. Thomas had created a system that delivered the statistics town leaders wanted, regardless of who suffered in the process. As the sun rose over Riverdale, Dominic stood in the parking lot, watching Agent Chen supervise the loading of evidence boxes into bureau vehicles. Ramirez approached looking exhausted but somehow lighter. "What happens to me now?" he asked. Dominic considered the young officer. "That depends on how valuable your information proves to be, and whether you're willing to testify if this goes to court." "I'll do whatever it takes," Ramirez said. "I need to make this right." "It won't be easy," Dominic warned. "You'll face backlash from other officers. The town might turn against you too." Ramirez nodded. "I know, but my kids deserve to grow up in a better Riverdale than this." As they spoke, a black SUV pulled into the lot. The window rolled down to reveal Assistant Director Wilson, Dominic's supervisor. "The mayor's demanding answers," Wilson called out. "Think you can pull yourself away from dismantling the local police force to join me for that conversation?" Dominic smiled grimly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." The real work was just beginning. The mayor's office occupied the top floor of Riverdale's town hall, a colonial-style building that had stood for over a century. Dominic followed Assistant Director Wilson through the polished hallway, noting the portraits of past mayors lining. The walls, all cut from the same cloth, generations of power handed down like family heirlooms. "Remember," Wilson murmured as they approached the office. "We're here to inform, not to accuse. Politics matters in a case like this." Dominic nodded, though the distinction felt meaningless to him. The evidence they'd gathered overnight painted a clear picture of a police department operating outside the law, and that couldn't happen without at least the tacit approval of town leadership. Mayor Harold Blackwood was waiting for them, standing behind his desk rather than sitting, a power move meant to establish dominance from the start. He was a tall man in his 60s with a politician's smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Gentlemen," Blackwood said, not offering his hand, "I understand you've created quite a stir in my town." Wilson stepped forward with practiced diplomacy. "Mayor Blackwood, I'm Assistant Director Wilson. This is Special Agent Reynolds. We're conducting an official investigation into civil rights violations by the Riverdale Police Department." "So I've heard," Blackwood replied dryly. "Captain Thomas called me at 5 this morning, quite distressed. Says you've suspended officers, seized records, essentially taken over his department." "We're following standard procedure for this type of investigation," Dominic said. Blackwood's gaze shifted to him, cold and assessing. "And what exactly triggered this? Investigation? One of your agents gets pulled over and suddenly our entire police force is corrupt?" "The investigation was already underway," Wilson explained. "Agent Reynolds was here gathering preliminary evidence when the incident occurred." "Based on what?" Blackwood demanded. "Anonymous complaints? Professional agitators looking to cause trouble?" Dominic felt his patience wearing thin. "Based on statistical anomalies in arrest rates and multiple credible reports of misconduct. What happened last night merely confirmed our suspicions." "Statistical anomalies," Blackwood repeated with a dismissive wave. "You can make statistics say whatever you want. The reality is, our police department has kept this town safe and prosperous." "For some residents," Dominic countered. "Not for all," the mayor's face hardened. "I was born in this town, Agent Reynolds. My father was mayor before me. I think I know my constituents better than some federal agent who blew in yesterday." Wilson shot Dominic a warning look before smoothly interjecting. "Mayor Blackwood, we understand your concerns. However, our investigation will proceed. We're here as a courtesy to inform you of next steps and to request your cooperation." "And if I don't cooperate?" Blackwood challenged. "Then we proceed without it," Wilson said simply. "But that would be unfortunate for everyone involved." The implied threat hung in the air. Blackwood was smart enough to know when he was outmatched. His shoulders slumped slightly as he finally sank into his chair. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Access to city records related to police department funding, complaints, and disciplinary actions," Wilson replied. "And your public support for our investigation." Blackwood barked a laugh. "Public support? You want me to go on record supporting a federal takeover of my police department?" "I'd be crucified. Not if you frame it correctly." Dominic suggested. This is your chance to be on the right side of this, Mayor, to show leadership. The right side according to who? The federal government? Blackwood shook his head. You don't understand the pressures we face here. Property values, business development, town reputation, it all depends on keeping certain elements under control. And that's exactly the problem, Dominic said sharply. Your certain elements are American citizens with constitutional rights. A tense silence filled the room. Finally, Wilson spoke. Mayor Blackwood, this investigation will happen with or without your blessing, but your cooperation could help minimize disruption to your community. Blackwood stared out his window for a long moment, watching as the town came to life in the morning light. Fine, he said eventually. You'll have access to whatever records you need, and I'll make a statement supporting a review of police procedures. He turned back to face them. But I won't throw Thomas or the department under the bus. They've served this town loyally. Loyalty to corrupt practices isn't something to be protected, Dominic pointed out. That's enough, Reynolds, Wilson cut in. To the mayor, he added, we appreciate your cooperation. We'll be in touch regarding those records. As they left town hall, Wilson pulled Dominic aside. You need to dial it back. We need Blackwood as an ally, not an enemy. He's part of the problem, Dominic argued. He's known what's been happening all along. Probably, Wilson agreed. But proving that is a different matter. Focus on the police department for now. We'll get to City Hall if and when we have solid evidence. Dominic wasn't satisfied, but he nodded anyway. Wilson was right about one thing. They needed to build their case methodically. Rush it, and the whole thing could fall apart. Back at the police station, the investigation was in full swing. Agents interviewed officers, technicians analyzed computer records, and specialists reviewed body camera footage. Dominic found Officer Ramirez in the break room, looking exhausted but determined. How are you holding up? Dominic asked. Been better, Ramirez admitted. Half the department won't look at me, the other half wants to punch me. That'll pass, Dominic assured him, though they both knew it probably wouldn't. Your documentation is proving invaluable. The pattern is clear. Traffic stops targeting. Minorities. Searches without consent. Excessive force during arrests. Ramirez nodded grimly. I knew it was bad, but seeing it all laid out like this, it's worse than I thought. It usually is, Dominic said. But here's what I don't understand. Why did you stay? Why keep a record instead of reporting it? Ramirez stared into his coffee cup. My father was a cop in Chicago, good man by the book. He reported corruption in his unit and was found with a bullet in his head 3 months later. Official ruling. Suicide. Understanding dawned on Dominic. So you were playing the long game. I figured anonymous evidence was better than no evidence, and better than being another suicide statistic. Their conversation was interrupted by Agent Chen, who entered with a tablet in hand. We found something you need to see, she told Dominic. Financial records. The three of them moved to a quieter corner as Chen pulled up spreadsheets on her tablet. Department seized over $2 million in asset forfeitures over the past 5 years. But only about half of that made it to the official budget. Where's the rest? Dominic asked. Diverted to a community improvement fund controlled by a private foundation. Guess who sits on the board? Captain Thomas? Thomas, Mayor Blackwood, and half the town council, Chen confirmed. Dominic whistled softly. So they had financial incentive to keep making questionable seizures. It gets better, Chen continued, swiping to another document. The foundation purchased several properties in the southeast quarter of town, the same neighborhood they've been aggressively policing. Bought them cheap after the owners ran into legal troubles. Or were forced into legal troubles, Ramirez added, the pieces falling into place. There's been talk about redeveloping that area for years, luxury condos, upscale shops. Which would be a lot easier without the original residents around, Dominic concluded. They weren't just targeting people because of prejudice, though that was certainly part of it. They were clearing the way for a development project. Chen nodded. Gentrification by badge and gun. The scope of the conspiracy was bigger than any of them had initially suspected. This wasn't just about a few racist cops. It was about money, power, and the systematic displacement of an entire community. As word of the investigation spread through town, reactions were mixed. Some residents, particularly those who had experienced police harassment firsthand, came forward with their stories. Others, including business owners and community leaders with ties to the mayor, publicly defended the department and criticized the federal intervention. By late afternoon, a small crowd had gathered outside the police station. Some carried signs supporting the investigation, others protested against it. Local news crews arrived, sensing a story that could put their small town on the national map. Inside, Dominic watched the gathering crowd through the window. "This is just the beginning," he told Wilson. "Once we go public with the financial connections, things will get ugly." Wilson nodded gravely. "We need to move quickly now. If Blackwood and his people realize what we've found, they'll start covering their tracks." "So what's our next move?" Dominic asked. "Press conference tomorrow morning," Wilson decided. "We lay out the initial findings, enough to justify our actions but not enough to tip our hand on the financial investigation. And Thomas? We bring him in for formal questioning. Same with Walters. We've got enough to arrest them, but I want to see if either one will flip on Blackwood and the others."